Hey, it's Rachel with Journey Back Quilts, and today we're going to journey back to the basics. We're going to be making flying geese one at a time. Let's get started. To make our flying geese blocks one at a time, I am cutting out one background piece that is 3 3/4 by 6 3/4 and two blocks that are 3 3/4 square. Since I'm using a really dark fabric to make these, I'm going to use my chalk liner. This is a Clover Choco liner, and I'm going to draw a diagonal line down the center of my blocks from point to point. I have the ruler off just a hair from the points so that my pen will hit that line exactly where I want it. Isn't that awesome? It just makes this teeny tiny little dotted line right down the center. I love this chalk liner for anything dark when I'm marking up a quilt to long arm it, or when I'm doing some piecing work like this. It is super handy, and I'll leave a link in the description box below if you want one for yourself. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is put these right sides together. Now, since I'm using solid fabrics, there's not a right or wrong side to these, so it doesn't really matter for mine. But if you're using a patterned fabric or something like that, you'll want to put them right sides together. And then we're going to just match it up on the sides, making sure those raw edges are matched up. Then we're going to sew right on that line. Then we're going to come back to the ironing board to flip it open before we put the second piece on. So let's go to the sewing machine. I'm going to use my open toe foot so that I can see exactly where my needle is going on my line. And I'm also going to start with a leader fabric, which is just a scrap piece of fabric, to help those threads stay up on top of the machine. This will help when we're doing anything with a point where the needle might push that fabric down into the machine. It's helpful to have a leader fabric. Okay, I'm just going to butt that corner right up to my needle, and I'm using this diagonal seam tape. And so you can see that I have the point lined right up with that center line. And then I'm just going to sew right on that line. Now I'm also using thread that is a contrasting color so that you can see it, but you may want to use a matching thread color so that it will blend better. Okay, now we can break thread here, and we need to go to the ironing board. I'm going to clip apart that connecting thread to my leader and leave that here. Let's go to that ironing board now. And the reason I'm here at the ironing board first is because I like to set my seams before I trim it, just to help all of those lay flat again. Sometimes when you're stitching, those little stitches can scrunch up your fabric, and we want that to lay flat when we trim it. All right, using my ruler, I'm going to line up the 1/4 inch line of my ruler right on my seam line and trim that 1/4 inch away from my seam line. Now you could sew this down, these two pieces, to make a 1/2 square triangle if you'd like. That way you don't have any waste and you can save those for another project. Now we're just going to peel that over and press it down. Okay, so let's do that. And now we can add the other side to it. So we want those lines to connect in the middle, like a V, to make this flying geese. And so we're just going to line up those raw edges on this side with our line going into the middle. And we're going to sew down that diagonal. I like to start on this side as I sew down, because right here we have more seams, and sometimes the needle has a harder time going over that to start. But once it gets a running start, it can just sew right over it pretty easily. So let's start in this corner and let's go sew that down. Again, I'm going to start with my leader fabric. Just has to be a few stitches. It doesn't have to be a lot. That way we're not wasting any thread. Line up that corner with the needle. Line up the opposite corner with the Seam Sew Easy tape if you have that. And I'll leave a link in the description box for this product as well. I love the diagonal seam tape. All right, let's go set those seams, trim, and then iron, and our block will be done. Again, just give it a quick press, just flatten it out. Trim it at 1/4 inch away, so put that 1/4 inch line on your seam. Don't cut right on your seam. Trim 1/4 inch away. And now let's peel this over and iron that out towards the point. Last step here is to trim this to size, and I'm wanting this to be 3.5 by 6.5. So I'm going to take my ruler, and the diagonal line here is what we're going to put right on our diagonal here. And then our center point is going to run right where that point is on our block. So the center for 6.5 would be 3.25. So we're going to have this diagonal line right on the diagonal of our block with 3.25 right in that center point. So it almost would make a little V right there. Like X marks the spot, but it's kind of just right there, okay? And just take a look, see where your 6.5 is, see where 3.5 is, and make sure you have enough to trim all the way around all 4 sides of this block. Okay, then we're going to trim this side and the top, and then rotate our block to trim the other 2 sides. Now we can line it up with 6.5 on the left and 3.5 on the bottom, double checking that 3.25 is still hitting right there at our point, and we have a 1/4 inch above the point of fabric on top. Because if we're going to add this to another block, we want to keep that point intact. So we need a 1/4 inch worth of fabric for our seam allowance. So now we're going to trim this side and that little bit on top. And there's our beautiful flying geese block. Isn't that awesome? So now when you sew the next one to it, if you're going to sew a whole bunch to them, this line is going to stay intact. Let me grab my block and show you. So here I've made several already, and you can see they're sewn together, but my point on all of them are still intact. Isn't that awesome? It's a great way to make sashing, borders, different blocks. I mean, you can play with this in so many different ways. You could be putting a block together like this, and then maybe couple coming down and some more coming in. It's so fun, so versatile to play with, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. So make sure you post your pictures on our free Facebook page called Your Quilting Journey Show and Tell page, and I'll see you over there. Hey, thanks so much for joining me today in making flying geese one at a time. I hope this video was helpful for you and you're going to go try it yourself. Next week, we're going to be making flying geese 4 at a time. I'll see you then.